Welcome to this explainer. Today we're looking at the data behind Vietnam's upcoming energy transition. We're talking about a massive decision here, folks, one that's literally going to shape the lives of 100 million people for the next 50 years. It's a huge crossroads, kind of like what France faced back in the 70s or South Korea in the 80s. So let's just dive right in, shall we? So we've got to start with the million-dollar question. How does a rapidly growing nation of 100 million people actually fuel its economy without, completely sacrificing its environment? Vietnam is gunning to become this huge, high-tech powerhouse. They're pulling in massive investments in semiconductors, AI, electronics, the whole shebang. But here's the catch. Those specific industries, they demand an enormous, absolutely uninterrupted supply of power. No hiccups allowed. And the sheer scale of Vietnam's energy challenge is, well, it's immense. Get this. Electricity demand is projected to grow by 12 to 15% every single year over the next few years. To put that into perspective, for every 1% of GDP growth, Vietnam needs 1.5% more electricity. Right now, to feed that insatiable demand, the country is over 40% reliant on coal. In 2024 alone, they imported a staggering 44 million tons of coal. This heavy reliance on imported fossil fuels is a massive vulnerability. It exposes the grid to crazy global price shocks and, of course, causes some pretty severe air pollution. To solve this puzzle, Vietnam is exploring the nuclear option, specifically the Ninh Thuan project. But whenever someone brings up nuclear energy, there's one immediate, totally understandable public concern we've got to address right off the bat.
Section 1. The truth about radiation.
Before we even think about nuclear plants, we really need to understand what radiation actually is. It's not just some scary human-made threat, right? It's a completely natural phenomenon. Background radiation is literally all around us, constantly. It's coming from the Earth beneath our feet, cosmic rays from space, and even the food we eat. The global average dose is about 2.4 millisieverts a year. Honestly, our human bodies have evolved in this exact environment for millions of years. Even the banana you might have had for breakfast contains potassium-40, which is a naturally radioactive isotope. The mere presence of radiation absolutely does not equal danger. It's just a normal part of everyday life. In medicine, they have this saying, the dose makes the poison. So let's put these numbers into a real-world perspective. Taking a routine flight from Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City, that's going to give you about 2 to 4 microsieverts of radiation just from cosmic rays. Getting a chest X-ray, that's about 100. But living right next to a normally operating nuclear power plant for an entire year, that exposes you to a microscopic 0.05 to zero point 0.1 microsieverts. You literally get more radiation from eating a single banana than you do living next door to a modern nuclear power plant. Crazy, right? And this brings us to this brilliantly incredible paradox. Check this out. A commercial flight attendant actually receives more occupational radiation over the course of a year, we're talking around 9,000 microsieverts just from flying at high altitudes, than a typical worker inside a nuclear power plant who gets around 7,000. Yet both of these figures are safely, and I mean well under, the strictly regulated scientific limits. We don't fear flying because of radiation, right? So looking at the data, it suggests we shouldn't fear modern nuclear plants for it either. Section 2. Measuring real energy risks. So if radiation isn't the daily danger we thought it was, how do we actually measure the true risks of our energy choices? Well, we have to zoom out and look at the macro-level safety data. According to empirical data from Oxford University's Our World in Data, which looks at deaths per terawatt-hour of electricity generated, nuclear energy is statistically tied with wind and solar at just 0.03 deaths per terawatt-hour. And that includes all historical accidents and daily operations. Now look at coal. It's sitting way up there at 24.6. That means coal is over 820 times deadlier than nuclear power, and that's primarily because of the silent, everyday crises of air pollution and fine particulate matter, like PM 2.5, which causes severe respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. The wild thing is, because it doesn't burn anything, nuclear energy is actually a literal lifesaver. Research from Columbia University calculated that by displacing fossil fuels on the grid, nuclear power actively prevented an estimated 1.8 million air pollution-related deaths globally between 1971 and 2009. Think about that for a second. It's essentially a massive clean air engine. Okay, I know what you're thinking. We absolutely have to talk about past disasters like Chernobyl and Fukushima, but it's so vital to understand how fundamentally reactor technology has evolved since then. Older 20th century tech relied on active, electrically powered cooling systems, and some even lacked robust containment buildings. But the modern VVER 1200 reactor design, which is exactly what Vietnam is considering, is a Generation 3 plus system. It uses passive cooling. What does that mean? It means if all power is somehow lost, the system uses the physical laws of gravity and natural convection to safely cool down the reactor automatically for up to 72 hours. And that's with absolutely zero human intervention or external electricity required. Section 3, Global Nuclear Success Stories. All right, so if the technology is scientifically safe, what actually happens to a country's economy when they embrace it? Let's use some global success stories as a sort of time machine for Vietnam's future. Take France, for example. In 1973, the global oil crisis brutally exposed their severe vulnerability to imported fossil fuels. So their government made a really bold pivot and launched a rapid nuclear build-out. Over just 15 years, they completed 52 reactors. Fast forward to today, and France's grid is roughly 65% nuclear. It gives them incredibly clean, reliable power, and actually makes them the absolute largest exporter of electricity in all of Europe. Talk about a game changer. Then you've got South Korea, and this is a story that's highly relevant to Vietnam. They started importing nuclear technology back in the 1970s to fuel their massive industrialization push, but they didn't just buy the tech and call it a day. They really learned it. Over the decades, they developed their own domestic intellectual property for the APR 1400 reactor. By 2009, South Korea had gone from an impoverished nation to winning a massive $20 billion contract to build the Baraka nuclear plant in the United Arab Emirates. They literally turned a domestic energy requirement into a multi-billion-dollar high-tech export. And let's talk about the financial return on investment here, because it's wild. According to an independent audit by Ernst & Young, Canada's historical investments in their domestic CANDU nuclear program yielded nearly a 5-to-1 return. Yes, you heard that right. For every single dollar invested, they generated about $5 for their national GDP. Ultimately, that added 23 billion Canadian dollars to their economy, all while saving billions more just by avoiding fossil fuel imports. Section 4, a balanced energy strategy. Okay, bringing the focus back home for a second. How exactly does nuclear fit into Vietnam's broader climate and economic strategy moving forward? The absolutely crucial point here is understanding energy reliability. Look, solar and wind are fantastic, for sure, but they are intermittent. Their capacity factor, which is just a fancy way of saying how often they're actually generating their maximum power, is usually only around 15 to 40%, simply because they depend heavily on the weather, the wind, and the time of day. Nuclear power, on the flip side, provides what we call baseload energy. It is continuous. We're talking a capacity factor of over 90%. It runs 24/7, whether it's midnight or a completely windless, cloudy day. So nuclear isn't meant to replace renewables at all, it's actually meant to support them. And when you look at an optimal clean energy mix, that's where you see the true magic happen. By having nuclear provide a scalable, clean 30% baseload right alongside hydro's 20%, you create this rock-solid foundation for the grid. This strong anchor actually allows intermittent solar and wind to thrive at 40% of the mix without the grid collapsing or relying on massive, currently unfeasible battery networks. It's the secret sauce that keeps the lights on for the hospitals, the subways, and those vital high-tech semiconductor factories we talked about earlier. Now, regarding those big climate goals, nuclear energy is pretty much essential. Remember, Vietnam made a really brave commitment at COP26 to reach net zero by 2050. Well, across its entire life cycle, from mining to operation to eventual decommissioning, nuclear emits only 4 to 12 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. To put that into perspective, that is statistically equal to the emissions of wind and solar, and it's hundreds of times lower than coal or gas. It is literally the lowest carbon, scalable baseload power currently available to humanity. There's this quote from an analysis of Canada's nuclear achievements that I think perfectly captures the global stakes here. It says, "Meeting the needs of the developing world is hard to imagine without nuclear power. It is also hard to imagine the heavy environmental burden future generations will bear if the huge increase in fossil fuel burning prevents other choices." When you really think about it, exploring the nuclear option is ultimately about taking responsibility for our future. And this brings us right back to Vietnam's ultimate vision. Because at the end of the day, the goal here isn't just about building power plants. It's about building a foundation for a modern society. It's about securing reliable 24/7 power, achieving true energy independence from those volatile imported coal markets, breathing clean air, and creating a thriving high-tech economy that generates tens of thousands of highly skilled jobs. Which leaves us with one final, pretty profound question. Prosperity or stagnation? What energy future will we choose? understanding the objective, scientific data behind nuclear energy isn't just some dry academic exercise. It's the literal key to unlocking a nation's true potential. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those tough questions and always keep following the data. See you next time.